Hello, everyone. Welcome to our new season of Adeva Fireside Chats. I'm excited to have Gil Zellner with me here today to kick off this new season. We'll be chatting about building ownership in engineering teams, and you're welcome to post your questions in the chat so that we can circle back to them at the end and try to answer as many as possible. Just for a quick intro, for those of you who are new here, Adeva is a remote network of tech professionals. Our mission is to enable work without boundaries so that everyone can work on exciting projects with exciting companies from wherever they are. These events are basically part of that effort so that anyone can learn from tech leads in leading companies. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Gil. Gil, hi, thank you for accepting my invite.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Can you tell our audience just briefly who Gil is and what we'll be talking about today?
So I've been doing tech sort of forever. It's kind of a running joke in my family that we were all born with a keyboard in our hands. So there's that, and I've been doing all sorts of operations, cloud, software stuff for a while now. And today I'm with Wix at the monitoring team, and what we do is that we help our developers get better insights on how their apps perform in production.
Nice. We'll talk about your actual experience and how that contributes to building ownership in teams and having everyone contribute to the growth of the company. I know you recently joined Wix and you had fun experience with the remote onboarding. So I thought that's an interesting topic to start with. Basically, what was your experience? What are the tips that you would like to give to people, especially when it comes to making sure that the new members are feeling welcome and they take ownership since day one in their new jobs?
I'm not so much sure about that ownership from day one thing, because you kind of have to grow into the role. You have to learn how things work before you can actually start feeling it. But in terms of onboarding, I think it's very, very important to have somebody there for them, like a mentor, a buddy, somebody they feel comfortable speaking with and asking questions. They need to be someone who speaks their native language well, because there are always tiny cultural differences that are kind of difficult to mitigate if you don't speak the native language. You need to have a lot of documentation. This is like one good thing that has come out of the whole pandemic thing, is that we got way better doing documentation, because we have to do more async things. We can't be at the office and just tap the guy next to us and say, hey buddy, how to do that. Then you can't do that anymore. So we got really good at documentation. We're not where we would like to be, but one thing that I'm very happy that we started on in the monitoring team is that we started doing much more documentation. We're doing it in GitHub in Markdown. So when you go into the repo for the code, you have the documentation right there with it. And when you have a pull request and you change something in the code, the documentation can change alongside it. And that way you can always make sure you're keeping things up to date, the same way you would normally have to update tests with your code. So now you update documentation with your code. And we hope to make things much better. So that's just one example.
I love the approach.
Another thing that we try to do is to get to do a lot of video chats, video calls where we demonstrate things to each other. Meaning that whenever somebody has an issue, they automatically say, okay, everybody, I'm dealing with this production issue. I'm going to share my screen. And now we can all know and all share the knowledge.
That's great. And speaking of Wix, it's a platform that depends heavily on third parties, and yet on the other side, it has to be available most of the time because users depend on it, right? A lot of websites, millions of websites are using Wix as their base. So I wanted to touch base a bit on this, like what are the things that you do to enable high availability first, and then in terms of the topic that we have today, it's extremely important for every member on the team, especially the more senior ones, to be heavily involved in the process, to contribute on daily basis if something happens, to take ownership and make sure things are improved fast. So let's first speak a bit about what you do in terms of enabling high availability, and then what's the role of every team member in it.
Okay. So first off, like everything in high availability, you need redundancy, meaning that you need to have systems that can take over when one system fails. We have solutions that route traffic differently based on availability, so that theoretically our users should not feel anything if for example, a data center is out or something like that. We also do a lot of work in terms of change management, in terms of making sure that we don't get to the point where we're down. So we have canary deploys, and we have all sorts of other solutions where we try to prevent the failure from happening to begin with. The best problem is the one where you prevented before it became a problem. So that's one approach. Another thing that we do is that because we try to provide high visibility into pretty much anything we can. We graph everything on Grafana, and we have it access all of our data sources. So a team could, for instance, show several different components on the same graph. So if you're relying on a third party, you can have their data alongside your data and see where the issue is much more easily. It's just in terms of accessibility, which is something that I've missed previously, and I can totally appreciate now. Mm-hmm. I've been very fortunate to work alongside very, very smart people and learn a lot from them. And one of the things that I've learned from my current team leader, Alex, is that keeping it simple is much more important than getting features. And I think that a big driver around our stability in that area is just keeping it simple. And so kudos to Alex. He mm-hmm. showed how important that is.
And when you say keeping it simple, is it like simple process, simple?
Try to have simple architecture. Mm-hmm. Try to have simple. So, for example, occasionally you could find yourself thinking, how do I want to gain that? When I want to have high availability, I can choose how do I cluster, how do I shard. Now, at every point, you need to decide how do I combine these elements, because the system as a whole still has to function together. So you need to have components to combine things like load balancers or processes or sync processes and things like that. And each one of those components had a layer of complexity. So if you do your work well, you can try to avoid as many of those complexity-inducing items. Now, they're not always avoidable completely, but you need to put a lot of thought into whether or not I want to put that in, because that will be that kind of aggregation ultimately becomes your downfall. That's just one example.
Right.
Yeah.
And when it comes to making sure that everyone is considering the big picture and contributing as they should, you mentioned you've learned from a lot of people, but do you have some process to ensure that? Like, what are the maybe steps that you would take when onboarding new people on critical roles to make sure that they have they own it, basically they contribute?
there at Wix we have something called nothing to production and then something to production. Now, this is something that they actually have the Server Guild, which I think is very, very cool. They take you take a simple app and deploy to production, and it's, at first glance it just deploys hello world, does pretty much nothing, and then you start adding things like a Kafka listener and other certain things that interact with other components of the system. And at that point, by the time that you're done doing your onboarding, you've already touched on the different types of components and the type of things that you can do. You have a kind of like a fake production experience, but it's experience nonetheless. Unfortunately, for us at infrastructure, it's much more difficult to do these type of things because each component is essentially unique. We can't really say that all these different types of things are the same and we have a similar process for them. But we try to find tasks that allow you to touch on different parts of the system. So for example, when I did my onboarding, I had to add a scraper for Prometheus, and I had to do some things on the log ingester. And we tried to have me touch on every different part of the system, that would allow me to later be more comfortable accessing them when there's a real production issue. So there's no substitute for experience. And another thing that I'm a big fan of, again, is the backseat driver solution. So if, for example, I have a new engineer coming in and there's a production issue, but it's not acute, meaning that I can let them try things a bit, then what I would do, and then I would kind of guide them through it, meaning that person would open the terminal and open the AWS console and whatever else they need to do. And we would have them do everything, and I would just be there to assist. So we would investigate it together, and then they would have to explain to me what they did. And they kind of learned through their fingers. And that's a theme that's been recurring in several positions now, I think, for the past few years. And I'm a big fan of.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And both of those are actually in line with what you said. You can't substitute the experience. So it's either mocking the environment or working together. But essentially, if they just read about it, they won't be able to do anything when the time comes.
Exactly.
And when it comes to now, I'm not sure if you'd like to share some example from Wix or any of your past experiences, maybe, I don't know, a production issue that was very critical for the company. But I'd like to hear some concrete example of a thing that happened that, was stressful at the point, but then contributed to building a stronger team and having people more able to deal with those problems in the future.
I actually like to go way back. So one of my first operations positions, I worked at Get, and I worked on the continuous delivery system. Now that's kind of fake, kind of cheating, because it wasn't really continuous delivery, meaning that the system was wired to it, but we weren't allowed to make it automatically deploy. So we would get the green light for deploy, and then I would just go and click it and say deploy. So I built the deployment system, and it replaced an older one, which was limited in many ways. And so we made the new one, and it was all great and wonderful until one day at 5 a.m. I get a phone call that says the deploy system has screwed up production, and we are down. So I go to my computer and I check, and then it took me a while to figure out what the actual issue is. And the actual issue itself wasn't that important. What I really gained from that experience is that I felt that I can solve issues, that I can debug production. And I think that you gain that, once you gain that confidence, you kind of, first of all, it makes you feel a bit superhuman. It's like, I can solve anything. There's nothing they can throw at me, and something like that, which is a bit of an exaggeration, of course. But you kind of need to have that feeling, because otherwise you find yourself paralyzed. You need to have that confidence that says, I can fix it. I can figure it out. And I think it's very important to make sure that your engineers have that confidence to touch things, and that it's okay if things break. What really matters is how quickly we get them back up.
Yeah, that's great way to put it. Were you working on your own then, or did you have some mentor that was working with you in the way you work with other developers now?
Now or then?
No, I mean back then. Did you have someone working with you, helping you, or were you on your own?
I had an amazing team leader, a great guy named Seva Feldman. I think he's with Iron Source now. And he kind of showed me how to get that through it, how to kind of go into my Zen. Like the first thing that you do when you get the phone call is that you say I'm on it, and write in the channel, like it was HipChat at the time. This was before Slack. Mm-hmm. Write in the channel, there's an issue, I am on it, and then turn off your phone. Because people won't let you work. They'll just keep calling you and say, there's an issue. Yeah, I know, I'm on it. Another thing that another important thing that he taught me was to always think of manuals, how you do things manually when the automation fails. So when I designed that system, I made it into tiny blocks that each one could function on its own in case I needed it to. So if there's a problem with the automation for whatever reason, it can just say, okay, let's skip this step. I'm going to do that manually and then move on to the next part. And that turned out to be a huge lifesaver. Good design goes very far. Yeah,
I guess it all boils down when it comes to having someone feel like they can do it and be able to, essentially, is the trust and the support from the team, because what you got there Dan from your colleague and what you're passing on your team right now, it's something that is critical. Otherwise, it's very easy to panic. It's very easy to just lose yourself and not be able to solve anything.
Yeah, and I'm very grateful for his help at the time, and his guidance that in many ways got me to where I am today. Again, I've been very fortunate to have a lot of really good colleagues.
That's great. And so when we talk about the other side, like not having someone who is able to contribute as productively or as willfully to the team, and having causes for burnout or issues in the team, I know you had some interesting talks on this topic as well. What are the things that you'd like to share on that point?
There are a lot of things, but this is where I learned the true value of actual ownership. One of the things that we had at another place, which I will not name, was that we were that the only people who did on call were the ops people, meaning that we would have on call every third week. And for that third week, you would not sleep at night. It was very, very difficult, and we all just got burned out. A few people resigned. Others became complacent. It doesn't really work well. And the reason we got there, once that they kind of figured it out later, was because we didn't really own the things that we were operating. Meaning, I would get the alert, but then I would just have to call on somebody else. Mm-hmm. Or I would get the alert and then figure out it was something that somebody else who is maybe on my team but not available did. So it's very, very important that the people who make the changes operate them later. It's very important that the people who have their own apps operate them later. Meaning that you have to kind of maintain that sense of ownership, and that is ultimately how you prevent burnout. Because if I know that my code will be that I know that my code would be causing an issue at night, then I would most likely put more effort into making it stable. So it just comes down to interests, like many other things in life.
Mm-hmm. And what happened? Did you find a way to fix things back then?
We tried to at the time. I ultimately left the organization because it was just not working. But I learned a lot from that. And because of my experiences there, that's when I started doing public speaking. Mm-hmm. So it largely goes like this. I came back. I went to my parents' house over the weekend, and we all got together for dinner. And I just complained a bit to my family about the things that were happening at work. And then my sister, who is a very, very smart person, Karen Cohen, you might want to interview her sometime as well. She was also at Wix for a while, and now she's at another place doing some other things. And she said, you know what, instead of complaining to me, why don't you complain on DevOps days? So good
advice.
Yeah, very good advice. So that was my first submitted talk, and I submitted the talk about burnout. And it was a huge hit. People loved it. I ended up giving it 7 more times at other places, and the rest is history.
Nice. And what are the takeaways from that experience that you're carrying with you in the new roles, like managing other teams or just working with other people?
So for just like just to ensure it's obvious, I'm not a manager today. I'm an individual contributor, but I do believe that there's a thing called leadership without authority. I do not have the authority to tell anybody else in the organization what to do. But what I can do is nudge them in the right direction. I can try to persuade them to do things differently. I can make tools that make things easier for them, and I can help them gain more insight into what they do, and in that way make everything better. So in many ways, my role is actually easier because of this tool limitation that I can't force anyone to do anything. It kind of forces me to behave differently about things. So I can't say to someone, you should do this way. I can ask them kind of what I call directional questions. So how would you fix that? How would you resolve that? And if this were an ideal world, what would you expect to have? And I find that this increases collaboration a lot more.
And people probably are not threatened by you because you're not their actual manager?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm not their manager. I can just say, look, this is what I recommend, and this is how things work. And how can I help you get the performance that you want?
That's great. And I just started, sharing some of your past talks and getting them as points of discussion today, but they were extremely interesting as I was preparing for this chat. You're welcome. And I wanted to touch on several of those. So the last one, the AWS, and while we are discussing this, maybe people can start sharing questions if they still haven't, so that we can circle back to that after. You have one talk which says how to make your team care about the AWS bill or something like that. So how do you do that? I think that screams ownership.
That was about yes, but in a different direction. So this was from so right now, by the way, this is not my area of ownership. There's a person named Dvir Mizrahi who works with me at Wix, who's doing an amazing job in that direction. And at the time, I was on a much smaller team. We were a 20-person company that was recently acquired by Oracle. And one of my tasks was kind of to reflect the cost, our AWS costs, to the rest of the company. Meaning that people had to know how much money we were spending and try to understand whether or not we were using that money efficiently. So we would do a lot of work in terms of getting things to run faster, as well as getting things to run more in parallel. Or maybe we can time them differently. At the time, AWS, for example, had better discounts for spot instances. So we would actually have an autoscaler that would respond to price changes. And we would do a lot of other things there. And all these things require a lot of work to be done in many, many different areas of your application. So, for example, if you want to respond to auto-scaling fast, you need you need your process to start quickly. You need to have better persistence. You need to manage different dependencies differently. Sometimes this requires networking changes because you're expanding to more subnets. So there's a lot of work to be done in many, many different places. And the only way that you convince people that something is important is by showing them actual data, meaning that you have a console and you share it with them and look, this is how much money we're spending. Is this good? Is this bad? I would have to do analysis over each month. The data collection was actually set up by my predecessor, but the analysis would have to be done every month, every time. And then there would be a guy at Oracle that I would have to submit that to as well, and they would just kind of read through it and see that okay, they're not spending our money, without thought. Mm-hmm. I think that in order to build goodwill on both sides, you have to show people that you care. So if I show them that I care about money, then it will convince them to give me a little more slack and a bit more freedom on the way to do my job. And if I go to other people who I need help from, in, for example, saving costs, and I would help them with other things that they need, then they would be more open to help me with reducing costs. Another cool thing that is actually happening right now at Wix, which Dvir, who I spoke of earlier, did, is a really cool mind hack. So one cool way to kind of convince people to improve on costs is to convince them this is part of what's called good engineering. So if your app is running inefficiently, it's not only wasting money. It's not reflective of your good engineering. We know you can do better than that. and so far it's actually showing very good results. So kudos to Dvir on that one. As I said, I've been working with a lot of very smart people, and I've been fortunate to learn from each and every one of them.
Yeah, that's great. And every engineer wants to be a better engineer. So when you challenge them like that, yes. Great. We have one question. It says, okay. How do you build a culture of ownership? Do you think it should go from the top down, or is there a different approach you'd use?
I think it largely depends on the existing culture inside the organization. So if you've got an organization that has people kind of just own things from the get-go, meaning in the sense that they just, this is our team and this is what we do and stuff like that, then it's great, it's already there. But I think there's no silver bullet here. I would start out by giving people more visibility on their work, meaning here's your data, here's how your app is doing, here is what your infrastructure is doing, your cost, your everything that you do. We're going to give you all the data, we're going to give you all the support, but you need to decide how you're going to run your application. You need to decide how you're going to run your infrastructure or whatever. You have the freedom, but you also have the responsibility. And once you couple these things together, people tend to kind of migrate into that situation themselves. Another good way to encourage ownership is when people build things on their own. If people build things on their own over a large period of time, they become emotionally attached to what they do. So they feel like this is a part of them, like the thing that they built, the system that they built is part of them, and they care about it deeply. And then and that's how they kind of believe that they're owners of it.
I guess this is also very nicely connected to the thing you shared before about not influencing, but just being there for people, and with that, making sure that they will grow to own what they do, just by sharing what you've experienced without being an actual manager or a leader. So I guess if you do that, if that becomes part of your culture, then other people will continue the process afterwards with new hires, and then it just spreads across the company.
Yeah, pretty much. This is one cool thing that I've learned from at AppsFlyer. We had a guy. He's actually still there, Neil Rubinstein, who's a chief architect. And one really cool thing that I saw that he did when he showed up to postmortems was that he kept asking simple questions. He kept asking, so if we did that, what would we get? And he would ask, and he would try to get everybody involved. He would just kind of point something, hey, what do you think? And he kept things very, very light, meaning think about the situation. There's a postmortem, something bad happened. We need to discuss it. But no, it's completely blameless. Let's try to think together how we can work through it. Learn a lot from him.
So no one is threatened, and everyone can just contribute to the conversation.
Exactly.
Great. Okay, another one. How do you balance company goals as opposed to employee goals? How aligned they should be, and how do you notice if there is a misalignment?
I think that in the long term, you cannot have a situation where employees are not getting what they want alongside management getting what they want, and vice versa. Meaning, you can have certain things in short term, right? We all have those tasks that we like less, and that's okay if that is not the majority of our position. But as long as we're honest about it and we say, look, this is not what I want to do, then we can figure out ways to mitigate that. So, for example, if I work on something and I'm not really happy about it, then I can talk to my team leader and say, look, this is not really interesting for me. This is not what I came here to do. And we can see maybe to give that task to another person, or maybe we can talk about what I'm doing next sprint, and that will be a task that I like more. Or maybe I can get compensated in some other way, like getting a certain course that I'm into, or learning other things, and then maybe doing a project with another team for a while. There are a lot of ways to make sure that people stay happy inside the company, because we all want to prevent the churn, right? Hiring is insanely expensive. So in order to keep people happy, we need to, first of all, be completely honest with them. This is what we need. This is what you need. Let's figure out a way to do that together. And beyond that, you can always kind of find these kind of certain halfway situations where, okay, so I'll do like 2 days of this and 3 days of that in a week until we solved whatever problem that we have. Another good thing that I've been seeing for a while now is that after enough people don't like a certain component in your system, there's a larger clout to get it replaced. So, for example, let's say, I'm not a big fan of Chef for several reasons. We won't go there now. But right now it gets the job done. But at some point, maybe it won't get the job done anymore. And then after enough people say that, then we'll have cloud say, okay, now is the time that we have the project in which we replace Chef with something else. But that's just one example.
And I guess it's very important for people to speak up as well, and not just get annoyed by it.
I think it's very important to kind of keep it, to maintain honesty in general, because you won't be able to have any discussion as long as if you're not honest. And when people kind of hold things inside, it kind of bubbles inside them until it bursts eventually. And at that point, you can't fix anything anymore. But if you kind of let it out bit by bit, then you can find solutions that mitigate the situation.
Yeah. Great. Do we have some other questions? I don't see anything here, but maybe just let's give a minute to people if they have some final things they'd like us to cover. Do you have something else that you'd like to add that we haven't touched on?
I'm also an organizer on DevOps Days Tel Aviv, and another conference that we have called StatsCraft. Both are in the space of DevOps monitoring and whatnot. It's happening November 24th and 25th in Tel Aviv.
Is it in person?
What?
It will be in person?
Yes, it will be in person, an in-person conference in 2021. Yes. So we're very, very excited about that. I think it's gonna be awesome, and yeah.
So that's great. You went from complaining on DevOps Days to organizing it, basically.
Exactly. It was also by chance. When I joined Cloudify, that was in 2015. Then the organizer of the conference, her name is Sharon, and she is an amazing person in many, many ways. And she was looking for a replacement for somebody else who just left the organizing team, and I just happened to be there, and I said like, okay, sounds cool, I'll bite. And and 6 years later, here I am, and I'm still doing that. It's a lot of fun. We also have a tradition that we have a kickoff barbecue at my place. So
nice.
I can show you some pictures later. I've gotten really good with the meat smoker. So
that's great. We have one more question, and I think that's the last one. How to help junior members in the team understand the impact of the work they're doing?
Show them and tell them. You start out by explaining what is the bigger goal here, what is the vision. So, for example, as a junior member of a team, I, for example, had to write a stress test once. So I kind of figured it wasn't a big deal, right? It's just a stress test. It's not that interesting. But then during a company all hands, they talked about that. And I was like, hey, here I am, the junior engineer. And somebody at the all hands, like with the stockholders and everything, like they said, talked about my work. And I was like, whoa, that's amazing.
It really is an amazing example.
Yeah. Another example is that occasionally something is part of a larger vision. So let's try to think of a good one. At Upslide, I think we had one of those situations where somebody did a training exercise and built a tool called Script Server. Like they built like an adaptation of an open source project. And at the time, it kind of looked, small and insignificant, like the original tiny stages. But eventually it became a tool that we all used very often. And it was like, yeah, Michael made that, and it was great to show how those tiny pet projects turn out to be like a huge impact.
Have you had actually the first scenario was yours, so that's. I wanted to ask if you had any feedback from juniors, who, like Michael that you mentioned just now, about their experience.
He wasn't exactly junior at the time; he was just new. But but I think we're still in touch. We're good friends. He has his own consulting company. Amazing guy.
I guess it applies to anyone. Doesn't have to be a junior, but just when you are new to a team and you're not confident enough, just to feel recognized. It goes a long way.
Yeah, it does. Giving recognition to people is extremely important. Whenever people need to be proud of their work, they need to feel, again, it's that emotional connection. This is more psychology than engineering, but when people feel attached to their work, they're more they put more effort into it, and they care a lot more, and then they do better work. And part of that is getting recognized for the good things that you do, even if they're small. I had a talk about this called Jerry Steiner Can't Lose. If you've ever seen Parker Lewis in the 90s, or maybe you're a little young for that. But it was a talk about making things that help people even if they get no glory. So, for example, one of the things that I love to do, I have these tiny one-liners that solve a problem. So you have so for example, okay, I have an app right now that I'm working on. Occasionally, again, this is just the development phase. But even in the development phase, I occasionally would deploy it, and then it would crash when it hit a certain Kubernetes cluster. And I want to get the final logs from it. So if I had to get the logs every time manually, I would have to first of all, it would either be a lot of clicks, or it would be a lot of typing. But I wrote this one-liner, just one line of code that just with a bash and everything. And what it does is that it finds me the log from the last crashed pod of this app. And that thing is a huge productivity booster. And these are exactly the kind of places that people who are new to the system can still do. They don't need any context. You don't need to know everything internally. You just know a little bit about bash and whatnot. And these things have a huge impact. Or another example that I saw, somebody else did this, and I was like, whoa, amazing guy. Occasionally, while we try to avoid having people SSH to their own machines and do that, this was, by the way, a long time ago, not applicable to Wix. You occasionally still have to do that. And if you have to go and look up things on AWS console, that takes a lot of time. So this guy wrote a bash function with about 3 lines. And what it does a certain lookup to figure out where you want to go. And you can literally type under 10 characters in your terminal and get to the exact place, the SSH to that machine. And it didn't do it wasn't any magic or anything. There wasn't super complex code wizardry there, but it was so simple, elegant, and effective that it saved so much time and removed so much frustration from debugging. And these are ultimately the things that make your work, that make you happy in your work. Because if I'm able to save you those 10 minutes, and those 10 minutes aggregate over time, I save you tons of working days. I make you more efficient. Because you're more efficient, you are happier. Because you're happier, you stay here longer. And yeah.
Amazing. 2 more questions, and I think we can wrap up. So the first one, how do you measure performance in your team? How many points do you measure? Some examples of what are some important things to consider?
Actually, so for all, I actually don't, because I'm not a team lead. So
in general, if there are some performance measures in the team that you're aware of, or in any past teams, something that you think is useful?
So there's always the kind of the sprint points system, where you kind of have measure things that you have, let's say 10 days in a sprint, and then we're going to say that certain tasks are a half point, certain tasks are 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, whatever. I think that usually works. People need to estimate things themselves, right? So for example, if you were to give me a task, you need to ask me how long I think it would take me to complete that task. And then we kind of negotiate on making that work. I think that is a very elegant solution.
Right. And this final question is, I think, a very nice way to wrap up the whole conversation, because it's completely on point of the topic. How do you feel ownership affects the overall team performance, like ownership of the team members?
I think it improves vastly, because when people care about their work, they do better work. When people feel emotionally attached to the system, they will put more thought into making it better. They won't be complacent about making changes hastily. And when people care, things get better. It is that simple.
Yeah, that's I think the best way to wrap up this conversation today. Thank you, Gil, so much for being here with me today. Thanks to everyone who attended. Just make sure that you subscribe on our YouTube channel if you want to receive updates and news for future events. And also DevOps Day, Tel Aviv, right? And I think there was a nice blog from Wix Engineering where you should be able to find some additional interesting topics from their experience. So check that out too.
Cool. One last plug.
Sure.
Yeah, sure. So we at Wix Engineering we not only have a blog, we have a LinkedIn page, we have a Twitter account, we have Telegram account. There's a lot of cool stories managed by a really cool guy called Mulad. Hey, Mulad. And there's a lot of cool, interesting stories, and we'd love to have you with us. And also, we're hiring, of course, and everywhere. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Gil, again. Thanks, everyone. It was a pleasure to have you all today. See you again next month.
Bye-bye.